Good morning, Wabash. This week, speaking at chapel is Dr. Jim Cherry. Jim Cherry is an associate professor and chair of theater at Wabash, where he teaches classes in theater history and film and directs theatrical productions. Giving his talk titled Uncomfortable Truths, or Why the Answer is Always in the Room, Dr. Cherry.
All right, thank you. Good morning, Wabash. That is so, look at that. That's so great. So I'd like to thank the Sphinx Club for inviting me to speak with you today. It's an honor. I know that for students, particularly those freshmen compelled to be here week after week, all these chapel talks may come to run together a bit. Week after week, you come and listen to an elder, broadly defined, proffer some nuggets of wisdom, perhaps I'll give a little direction on the path ahead, maybe reminisce about the days of yore when men were men and Sparks served chicken patties on white bread rather than locally sourced chicken draped in a small batch remoulade and swaddled in an artisanal gluten-free pita. But I kid, bon appetit, and the food is seriously, it's gotten a lot better. And you have no idea how good you have it, you spoiled, rotten kids. So, but for us, these givers of chapel talks, they are rare birds indeed. We mark time by them. As I was writing this one, I kept thinking about how much my life has changed since the last, in so many unexpected and challenging ways. When I gave my last chapel talk 4 years ago, my beautiful son George was less than a year old. My twin daughters, Rebecca and Catherine, shout outs, they're like right back there. Yeah. Weren't around. I hadn't shared an apartment. I hadn't hoisted Caleb Mills's walking stick to begin commencement in my duties as Wabash's faculty marshal. And I hadn't played a young, sexy Captain Hook on stage yet. It was September 2012, another hotly contested election. Clint Eastwood had just talked to a chair at the Republican National Convention. It was a heady time. But I was then, as I still am now, thank God, married to my amazing wife, Professor Crystal Benedicts in the English department. Whose birthday it is today, okay? So if we could mortify her collectively, which we just did, by wishing her a happy birthday, that would be awesome, okay? Ready? Happy birthday, Professor Benedicts, on three, okay? 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday, Professor Benedicts.
Oh, all right, that's so bad. All right, but thank you. Thank you for coming out today. It's a busy time of year, as if there is a time of year at Wabash that isn't. There's always papers, always quizzes, always lectures, always lab reports, always library, always gym, always art studio, always in all possible ways. We are busy bees, and this is a hive. And who is the queen bee of this hive? Beyonce. That's a silly question, but in reality, we're all working together toward your individual educations, toward getting you to that next step. If you're ever having issues, this is for students. We're all here for you. Okay, every faculty member, every staff member, every student here is on notice. Helping is what gentle men, gentle women, gentle people, and we are gentle people, do. But let's take a pause and consider that right now, leaves turning, little chill in the air, maybe. The late autumn offers some particular excitements, okay? This autumn in particular. The Chicago Cubs won a World Series last night. I was pretty unsure. I wasn't even going to give this talk today because I thought, well, that's it, right? We can call it a day. Like the Earth is over, right? Madness. Next week, there is, if memory serves, a certain football game against a certain university to the south. And there's a certain trophy at stake, the dulcet tones of which we will hear all next week. Driving batty, your professors with offices that face the chapel, and that we pray we will hear all the next week after. And to that team, in many ways, I think it feels as if you take the hopes of this entire college on your backs when you go and you fight for that bell. But understand that we know the sacrifices you've made, and as far as your backs are concerned, we have yours. So good luck, fellas. There are also presidential elections next week. I mean, this is like a stressful time. An election in which, for the first time in our nation's history, when neither of the major party candidates could have graduated from this great college. Hillary Clinton, obviously, because she's a woman, and Donald Trump, obviously, because he's an ungentlemanly dolt. And you saw the debates, okay? How would Donald Trump do at oral comps? There's no mercy in that dojo, okay? Like, what would his nightmare comps board look like, okay? Steve Murillo, Amanda Ingram, and Agata Shijak Brewer. That's my, like, you can put that on pay-per-view, okay? It's a revenue stream, another revenue stream for the college. But allow me to do my due diligence as a responsible grown-up to remind you to do your duty as a citizen and vote next week, because this is a participatory democracy, voting matters, it's the most important election of our lifetime, et cetera, but seriously, vote. And do the right thing. Because if Donald Trump wins, everybody's investment portfolio is going to go to hell. Professor Bennix and I won't be able to retire. Just do the right thing, okay? Okay, thank you. Now, obviously, with the free world hanging in the balance, stuffed to our gills with work and 50% off Halloween candy, ensconced in, to quote the poet John Keats, that, quote, season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, we are clearly in the mood to dwell on some uncomfortable truths. Not to abjure happy talk, but life is filled with uncomfortable truths. We probably won't become the people we dreamed we'd be when we were 10, or 20, or 50. How you look physically matters way more than it ought to. Attractive people have an easier time of it in life than less attractive people. People who we love and who love us will let us down, and we will let them down. If we are lucky, we get to grow old. Life goes by too fast, is unbearably short, and we don't appreciate it as we should when we should. I could go on indefinitely. Uncomfortable truths like these are the ghosts that haunt all of us, the objects of dread we may think it better to put on a shelf and pointedly ignore. But as human beings, we find ways to manage them. Dedication to a larger purpose, to religion, science, and just working to make a better world for generations to come. But however we manage our uncomfortable truths, we confront them together in communities. And this is what you get when you come to a place like this. This is a built-in community for the confrontation of the uncomfortable truths of life. And if you're not getting that out of your Wabash education, tell me, tell somebody, tell anybody. Because if nothing else, a liberal arts college needs to be a site where people can come together to get at the marrow of who we are, what our lives mean, to consider the expectations and trajectories, tackle and come to terms with the disquieting and the ambiguous. It can't just be about getting a job after graduation. It's about living a fuller, better, happier life after graduation, and for all of the years after that. And for me, this is one of the reasons why theater, why the making of and teaching and writing about is my life's work, and why theater is so important. From the very beginning, at its essence, theater has been about bringing people together in a room to tell stories that matter. but in particular ones that are hard to hear. Consider, will you, basically any Greek tragedy. Oedipus Rex, Antigone, Medea, the Bacchae. The moral of the story often comes down to something very, very simple. We're not nearly as in charge of our lives as we like to think that we are. And what is a more truly uncomfortable truth than that? And these characters, these tragic heroes, Oedipus, Creon, Jason, these stand-ins for ourselves, they learn this truth the hard way. They end up blind, exiled, maybe occasionally with their head on the end of a stick. But what's interesting about the epiphanies of these characters from Greek tragedy is that once they have their epiphany, the play ends. Curtain comes down. The horror is over for them. But what about for us? We, the audience members, are left alive. We don't go into exile. We just shuffle to the exits, just a little bit different. And in the theater, audiences have taken uncomfortable truths home for centuries, not just the Greeks. Playwrights like Christopher Marlowe and Shakespeare and Heinrich Ibsen and George Bernard Shaw. I'm thinking of Don Herring when I mention him. Arthur Miller, Tennessee Williams, August Wilson, Sarah Kane, Paula Vogel, all of them, all of these playwrights, purveyors of uncomfortable truths. Shakespeare's Macbeth, upon learning of the death of his wife, his castle surrounded by his enemies, betrayed by his own ambition, discovers that, quote, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It's a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, end quote. He gets his head chopped off in the very next scene. We get to go home and write research papers, pay the mortgage. Thanks, Shakespeare. Alfred Hitchcock once said that drama is life with the dull bits cut out. Playwrights for centuries have cut to the marrow, give us life crystallized. But our epiphanies off the stage are never nearly so cut and dried. We don't get a punchy tagline delivered by Greek choruses. After college, I knew I wanted to go to grad school for theater, but I didn't know if I wanted to get an MFA in acting or a PhD in theater history. And I couldn't choose acting or scholarship. On a subconscious level, maybe I thought you should just teach at a small liberal arts college for men in the middle of nowhere. You can do both. But I did what I thought was the smart thing, and I offshored the decision entirely on other people. I applied to both kinds of programs, and I was like, okay, whatever one I get into will be the one that I'm meant to go to, right? I got into both kinds of programs. And then suddenly, this decision wasn't made for me after all, and I bought a Nat Sherman cigar, okay? I don't smoke cigars, but I figured if there was a moment for an expensive contemplative stogie, this was one, right? And so I sat on the wraparound porch of the old house I was renting with a few friends. I decided I would smoke this cigar, and by the time I had finished it, I would make my decision. I would have it. It would be obvious. And so I lit the cigar, and I thought, did positives and negatives, and I realized I really don't like smoking cigars. But if I put it out, I would have had to have made a decision. So I was trapped, watching the pile of ashes mount, the cigar shrink into a squishy butt, trying and failing to figure out my future. But what I realized was that what I needed to do was talk to everybody I knew about this critical central call in my life. I talked to my professors after that, my advisors, my teachers from high school, my parents, my friends. I talked to absolutely everybody. And then as educated as I could possibly be, I made a leap into the dark. And my point is, we always need to talk through together the coming to terms with ambiguity, because the answer is always in the room. Now, the answer is always in the room is something of a cliche in theories of business leadership, but some cliches do have the benefit of being useful regardless. The point is that once you've looked at a problem from multiple angles, you've done your research, you've worked possible solutions through with your colleagues, the answer is probably right there. If you surround yourself with good people, the answer is right there. It may not even be an actual room. For this purpose, we may say that Wabash is the room of our own. It may not be an easy answer. maybe difficult to deal with, but with the aid of smart, creative, caring people around you, like, say, at a small liberal arts college for men in the middle of nowhere, you can solve that problem. You just have to see it. But seeing it, the problem, is one of the reasons why it's important to bring people together from a lot of different life perspectives. One of the reasons why diversity is so critical, from college admissions to business hiring. If you have a bunch of people in the room, they're all from the same area, they've had the same kind of schooling, they've had reasonably similar life experiences, you're not going to have a variety of perspectives. In order to get a spectrum of possible answers, you need a lot of different kinds of people in that room. And as a director, I see the benefits from the answer in the room mantra in the rehearsal hall all the time. But I didn't always. And over the years, working with Wabash students and my colleagues, Michael Abbott, Dwight Watson, Jesse Mills, Andrea Baer, I have seen how they come to arrive at answers, which is to trust the room. When I first directed here, I always had all the answers walking in, okay? Every scene was tightly choreographed ahead of rehearsal. The play was a neat little puzzle that I had solved in my head ahead of time. But I didn't ever really have all of the answers or the best ones. But what I was doing was closing off the multitude of possible answers. We need to trust the room. And when dealing with issues that maybe we'd rather just not deal with, we cannot close off discussion. And since Wabash is not without some uncomfortable truths of its own, let's confront some of them, because the answer is in the room. Uncomfortable Wabash truth 1. Tradition binds us all together and binds us to our past, but it can also hold us back. Spoiler alert, tradition is important to this college and the community. We are festooned with it. I could tell you what the casts of Wabash plays do before productions, but I'm fairly sure I would get tackled from the stage before I could finish the sentence. Tradition is important to all institutions. Your professors who didn't go here can tell you all manner of kooky, crazy traditions at their own colleges. At Bates College, my alma mater, another story liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere, we had a thing called the so-called puddle jump. By the way, I'm not endorsing this by any means. A puddle jump every January. In the middle of winter in Maine, football players would chainsaw a hole in the ice of the pond in the middle of campus. Students, men and women, would break from studying, put on swimsuits, charge out of their dorm rooms, and get dunked into the hole by offensive linemen, and then run back to their dorms and get back to work. This was not, smart. But it was, fun and tradition. Our college thrives on tradition. We have practically a meta-tradition about how much tradition we thrive on. Maybe this is partly due to the single-sex nature of the place. Maybe men are more tradition-bound than women. Maybe tradition, particularly as regarding roles in society, hasn't been as good historically for women as it has been for men. Maybe in men's desire for control over the uncontrollable, we take a bit more solace in ritual and tradition. If your team has just scored, you don't move from the couch, okay? You stay still. I have a Red Sox hat from 2003. It's 13 years old. It's gross. But when they play in World Series games, when I'm wearing it, they win. It's a religious relic to me. I will pass it on to my kids. But all of these traditions are gentle buffing of Eli Lilly's head, not stepping on or underneath various campus architectural features, chapel sing, homecoming, the coming together every Thursday in this chapel. These traditions help shape our lives. Some we've inherited, and still others we change. But this last one is difficult. Shall we recall last year's chapel sing, when those W's became scarlet letters of pride rather than shame? The Sphinx Club took a certain amount of criticism for that, but I would say that they were right to do it. We should not be in the business of shaming our peers. The world does that. We shouldn't. We should be in the business of exalting them, lifting them up. It is what we expect our alumni to do for us. Why should it be any different here? Which brings us to an uncomfortable truth. The phrase, DePauw swallows, sucks. And we all know why. It's crass, it's sexist and homophobic, it determines feminine and queer as utterly deplorable negatives. It's like saying you play like a girl and a faggot. It's offensive. And not just to women or gay people, of which there are plenty around these parts, but to those who think that reviling by stereotype is an ugly way to live in the world. Even if, for the sake of fun and collective DePauw hatred, we wouldn't necessarily like to admit it. But please understand that I know that I'm not an ideal messenger for a sermon on how we shouldn't say naughty things in public. I make my living doing theater, which is oftentimes about saying and doing naughty things in public. I was wearing a mermaid costume on stage just a couple of weeks ago, okay? Some years ago, I directed a play by David Mamet called Glengarry Glen Ross, which has a stronger F-bomb to word ratio than most Tarantino movies. Anyone who has worked with me in the rehearsal hall knows that profanity comes very easy to me, delivered in zesty torrents when someone forgets a line, particularly when that someone is me. But the phrase DePauw swallows sucks nonetheless. Now, here's a funny thing. On one level or another, we all kind of know that. How many of us have struggled to explain this little catchphrase to our parents? Last year, after class, I asked a freshman to square it. How does chanting something sexist, homophobic, and obscene in public be gentlemanly? And he was like, well, it's not. But here's the thing. In the past, it probably was. We know it's wrong today, but tradition tells us that if it's been done here for some time, it's got to be worth doing forever. Based on some interviews with alumni, DePauw swallows probably originated in the 1970s. As someone who barely remembers the 70s, let me just tell you, it was terrible. There were gas lines, seriously, gas lines. There was Watergate, bell bottoms, disco. It was a nightmare, okay? Wabash and the country was a different place in the 1970s. It was a difficult thing to be gay at Wabash in the 1970s, okay? It was hard to be a woman at Wabash in the 1970s. It's still not super easy now, okay? But the strides that we have made as a community toward a greater tolerance of difference has been considerable. I think it's evident that Wabash is a much kinder place than it was when I first came here nearly 10 years ago. So permit me this. I don't think that DePauw swallows fits us anymore. And by going along with it, we're also leaving on the table so many ways of bolstering our teams to victory. There are just so many things that we could say that are smarter, that are more fun, that are more gentlemanly, that are just more friggin' Wabash than DePauw swallows. Do any of you happen to know, for instance, what little giant smash is in Latin? Let me tell you. Parve inganes per fringre. Let's try that, okay? Parve inganes per fringe. Parve inganes per fringe. It's beautiful. It rolls off the tongue. It means literally little huge one. Little huge one. Break through or thoroughly. See, little giant is in the vocative here because of direct address, and the verb is in the imperative. Hat tip to Professor Jeremy Hartnett and a couple of classic students for that. Gratias tibi ago. But I am well aware also of the beauty of call and response. I say something, you say something, and that allo sound is so satisfying. It's the howl of the pack. So how about this? Wabash leads, DePauw follows. Right? Right? I mean, like, come on. All right, okay, so see, it's suitable for children, okay? It's fun. But wait a minute, Wabash isn't always leading. Okay. Well then if let's just say we're losing. Well, then what then? Wabash always fights, right? There are so many choices. You find them, experiment with them, we can do better. Because the answer's in the room. Uncomfortable Wabash truth number 2. We take as a given that the person you come to as Wabash, when you come to Wabash isn't the person you'll be when you leave. But you also have no idea how different you could be. This is a really hard one, if you ask me. We so desire that clean narrative arc of human progress. First I do this, and then this, and then this, and then wealth, and then big house, and then loving partner, and happy kids, and fulfilling life. When I was a freshman, starting at Bates, I was planning on majoring in political science, minoring in Russian, going to law school, and then probably into politics. It was really very straightforward. Security, money, power, success. It's all the things we're supposed to want, particularly guys. And a very sensible, straightforward track for getting there. The realization that I wasn't going to do any of those things was very difficult to come to. But the signs were all there. Political science bored me to tears. I was terrible at Russian. I loved theater and history all my life. The identity I had constructed for myself didn't fit, no matter how hard I worked to shoehorn it on. When I switched majors, embraced history and theater, I knew that I had come home. The classes challenged and fascinated me. I was successful instead of frustrated. Theater and history were the things that kept me up at night and that got me out of bed in the morning. And we deserve that. We all deserve that. We don't have enough time to try and be the people that we aren't. It's sad and it's uncomfortable, but it's true. And I know that that also comes from a position of privilege, which is to say, I'm on the other side. I have a job that I love. And getting here seems so straightforward in retrospect. But I remain very aware of the fact that it just wasn't at the time. I had parents, friends, professors who supported me. And you have that support here. There is support everywhere here at Wabash. And if you feel like you're not getting it, you need to go get it. You're paying for it. You deserve it. You don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer or a businessman to be happy. Recently, I was in New York City on an immersion trip, and our group had the pleasure to speak with a guy named Jack Moore, who works at a theater in New York as a literary associate. Now, what he does for a living is he finds new plays for the theater to put on, so he reads stacks of plays, he flies around the country seeing new plays, he looks for plays to bring back to New York to the theater he works for. That's what he does. That's his job. Now, he's probably in his early 30s, and it came up in the discussion that we had as a group. He had no idea that this job existed when he was in college. He didn't have a clue about this. There is so much more out there than what we realize when we're 17. Jack was open to change, to possibility and ambiguity, and to working the hell out of his contacts, his network, the room that he had. And for almost all of you, what you'll be doing 10 years from now, you cannot possibly imagine. And that fact is terrifying. But you can find the support to do these things in this room, right here. Uncomfortable Wabash truth number 3. Just like you, Wabash is a grand experiment and a work in progress, not an unchangeable, constant institution. And it can be lost. To say that Wabash is a unique place is something so beyond obvious, I have a hard time even saying it. For many of you, as for I, it's maybe not precisely what we had in mind with the whole going to or working at a college game. Single-sex, all-male college in West Central Indiana. Really? Really? How many of you were teased by high school friends about coming here? Because going to a single-sex school means that you're gay or going to become gay. Of course you were, right? By the way, this is also how phrases like to pause swallows get normalized. They're meant to inoculate us from being called gay. Not that it works. It only makes us less tolerant. But when I meet people at academic conferences and I talk about Wabash, they're all like, yeah, what's that like? Because what they want to hear is, that's totally insane. Which, and let's be honest, It kind of is, right? Wabash is very hard for people to understand. When most of us came here, most of us didn't get it. To my conference colleagues, I can say, well, actually, it's one of the most meaningful educational experiences imaginable. A cadre of hyper-dedicated faculty and administrators, incredibly dedicated alumni, a bunch of bright game students, and together we figure out what it means to be a man in the 21st century in a globalized world. At which point they're like, oh no, that sounds really good. That sounds really good. That's really interesting. Because it is. Liberal education, the kind that you have here, small classes, a mix of the arts and humanities and social and natural sciences, reading and writing, lots of close mentorship. This is the kind of education that fortunate young men and young women have had access to due to accident of birth and circumstance, because this is expensive. More expensive, getting to the uncomfortable truth part, than you're paying. To make this college go, we are incredibly reliant on alumni giving and for the performance of the endowment. Your college experience is heavily subsidized. This is a Rolls-Royce Phantom education for the sticker price of a Ford Focus. And you know this. You made the decision to come here, 100% dudes and all. To keep this place, to give this place to our sons and grandsons, we have to make the case for this place every day. History tells us that every single-sex college is single-sex until it isn't. We are the anomaly. And the life-changing education you get here is hard, and it's expensive, and it's time-consuming, and it's hard for others to grasp, and it's easy to stereotype. What are you going to do with that rhetoric major? I don't know. Anything? In a time of economic insecurity, when politicians muse aloud about kids learning to code in kindergarten, the work we do here becomes both more important to the world and important for us to justify to the world. The world needs Wabash. So when you leave here as graduates, please support the college. And I don't mean just give money, though you should definitely do that. But talk about this place to skeptical high schoolers. You were one once. Give that rando Wabash dude a shot as an intern. Put in a good word with someone when you can. It all matters. Because, and I'll end here today, we are the room. We are all part of this grand experiment together. In the American theater class that I teach, I begin with some poetry, a little Walt Whitman. I hear America singing from Leaves of Grass. I'm going to quote it at length here. It's a terrific exaltation of those themes that Whitman holds so dear, the beauty of the everyday, of democracy, of what Ezra Pound called, quote, the sap and fiber of America. Now, Pound had some complicated feelings about Whitman, as he did about Wabash. But this is Wabash to me, quote, I hear America singing, the varied carols I hear, those of mechanics, each one singing his as it would be, blithe and strong, the carpenter singing his as he measures his plank or beam, the mason singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work, the boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat, the deckhand singing on the steamboat deck, the shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench, the hatter singing as he stands, the woodcutter's song, the plowboy's on his way in the morning, or at noon intermission, or at sundown, the delicious singing of the mother, or of the young wife at work, or the girl sewing or washing, each singing what belongs to him or her and to no one else, the day what belongs to the day. At night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly, singing with open mouths their strong, melodious songs, end quote. Here, Whitman sings of the lads of the working day, all doing his or her own work, singing his or her own songs, finding their own personal truths on their journeys, uncomfortable as those truths may be. But the answer is in that room, that party of young fellows, robust and friendly, and singing with open mouths those strong, melodious songs. Those are the songs that are sung by all of us together. Different tunes and words, perhaps, but a harmony, nevertheless. Thank you.